Ever feel like you're building your life on shaky ground? Like, one good storm could just knock everything down.
Yeah.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into how to build a life that's strong and stable no matter what challenges come your way.
It's a universal desire, isn't it? That yearning for stability and peace.
Yeah.
Especially in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
Absolutely. And we're going to explore this idea through an article called Build Your Life on the Rock, a blueprint for enduring strength and peace. It's based on that classic biblical story from Matthew 7.24 about the wise man who built his house on solid rock.
A powerful metaphor, and one that has resonated with people for centuries. But what's fascinating is that it's not just a story for the religious or spiritually inclined. The principles behind it, building on a solid foundation, apply to all areas of life.
I love that you brought that up because I think sometimes people hear Bible story and they kind of immediately tune out. But this deep dive is really for anyone who wants to create a life that can weather those inevitable storms.
Exactly. And the article starts by laying out that foundation, really, with Jesus' words from Matthew 7.24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock.
You know what strikes me about that verse is the emphasis on action, on putting into practice. It's not enough to just know the right thing to do. We have to actually do it.
You've hit on a crucial point. It's a common thread in wisdom traditions across cultures and throughout history. Think about it. We can read self-help books, attend workshops, listen to podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
But if we don't actually apply those lessons to our lives, nothing really changes. It's like having a detailed map, but never leaving the house.
So true. So in this case, the map is the article, and the destination is that rock-solid life, right?
Yeah.
But the article doesn't shy away from the fact that actually building on that rock can be challenging.
Yeah.
There are a lot of steps involved.
Right. And before we even get into the steps, it's important to understand what that rock symbolizes. The article offers several interpretations. God's unchanging truth, his teachings, Jesus Christ himself, and living with integrity.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little. For someone who isn't familiar with biblical interpretations, this might sound a bit abstract. What do those things have in common that makes them such a strong foundation?
That's a great question. At their core, each of those elements represents something stable, reliable, something that has stood the test of time. God's truth and teachings, for example, have provided guidance and meaning for billions of people over millennia. Jesus Christ is seen as a cornerstone of faith for millions, representing unwavering love and sacrifice and living with integrity. Well, that's about aligning your actions with your values, which creates a sense of inner consistency that can help you navigate any situation.
I see where you're going with this. It's like, imagine trying to build a house on shifting sand.
Oh,
It's never going to be truly stable, is it? But a house built on solid rock, that's a different story.
Precisely. And that's the kind of stability we're talking about here. Not just physical stability, but emotional, mental, and spiritual stability as well. It's about having a foundation that can withstand the storms of life, whether they come in the form of relationship problems, financial stress, health challenges, or just those everyday anxieties that can weigh us down.
Okay, so now that we understand the why building on a solid foundation is so important, let's dive into the how. The article outlines several steps for actually building on this metaphorical rock.
And it starts with a practice that's been emphasized in spiritual traditions for centuries: regular study and reflection. The article specifically mentions studying the Bible, but this principle can be applied to any source of wisdom or inspiration that resonates with you.
So it's not just about passively reading or listening.
Right.
It's about actively engaging with the material, like really wrestling with the ideas and trying to understand how they apply to your own life.
Exactly. And this goes beyond simply accumulating knowledge. It's about seeking deeper meaning and understanding. It's about connecting with something larger than yourself and finding wisdom that can guide you on your journey.
Okay, so we have to study, reflect, really internalize these guiding principles. But the article doesn't stop there. It also emphasizes the importance of putting that knowledge into action. Otherwise, what's the point, right?
Absolutely. This is where the rubber meets the road. We can have all the knowledge in the world, but if we don't actually apply it, if we don't integrate those principles into our daily lives, it's all just theoretical. It's like knowing the perfect recipe for a cake, but never actually baking it. You might be able to impress your friends with your knowledge, but you're missing out on the real experience, the joy of creating something delicious and sharing it with others.
I love that analogy. It's not enough to just talk the talk. We have to walk the walk. So in this case, walking the walk means taking those principles we've learned and actually applying them to our decisions, our relationships, our everyday actions.
You got it. And the article provides some specific examples of what that might look like, but we'll save those for later. What I find interesting is that this idea of putting knowledge into action is not just a religious concept.
Oh, absolutely. It's relevant to any area of life where we're trying to grow or improve. Think about learning a new language, for example. You can study vocabulary and grammar all day long.
Right.
But if you don't actually practice speaking, you'll never become fluent. Or think about learning a new skill, like playing an instrument or coding. You have to put in the hours, make mistakes, and keep practicing in order to master it.
Exactly. And the same principle applies to building a life on solid ground. We have to take those principles, those values, those beliefs, and translate them into concrete actions.
Okay, so we have study and reflection. We have putting knowledge into action. What other steps does the article suggest for building on this solid rock?
Well, this is where the concept of fellowship comes in. The article emphasizes the importance of connecting with like-minded people, people who share your values and can support you on your journey.
You know, I used to think that whole community thing was overrated. I considered myself pretty independent, like I could handle everything on my own. But then I went through a really difficult time a few years ago, a job loss, family issues, just a whole pile of stress.
Oh, wow.
And honestly, having a supportive network of friends and family made all the difference. Just knowing I wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about me and had my back, helped me get through it.
That's a powerful testament to the importance of connection, and it highlights the key point the article makes. We're not meant to do life alone. We're social creatures, hardwired for connection and belonging. And when we surround ourselves with people who uplift us, who encourage us, who share our values, it strengthens our foundation immeasurably.
So we have study, we have action, we have fellowship. Anything else?
The article also emphasizes the importance of prayer, of connecting with something larger than yourself. And I know for some people, the idea of prayer might feel a bit intimidating or even off-putting, especially if they haven't grown up in a religious tradition.
Yeah, I can see how that might be a stumbling block for some. But isn't the core idea of prayer really about connecting with something that gives you a sense of peace, of purpose, of grounding? Like, it doesn't have to be a formal ritualistic thing, right?
You're absolutely right. Prayer can take many forms. It can be as simple as taking a few moments of quiet reflection, focusing on gratitude, or seeking guidance and strength from something beyond your own limited understanding.
So it's more about aligning yourself with something that gives you a sense of purpose and direction, like tuning into a frequency that helps you feel more centered and grounded.
That's a great way to put it. And the article suggests that incorporating this practice into your life, whatever form it takes for you, can be a powerful tool for building resilience and weathering those inevitable storms. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We still have a lot to unpack when it comes to applying these principles in real life.
Indeed we do. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive into some real-life examples of how people have built their lives on this solid foundation and discover some tips for applying these principles to your own life.
Welcome back to our deep dive into building a life on solid ground. Before the break, we were discussing the key elements of creating a strong foundation. Study and reflection, putting knowledge into action, connecting with a supportive community, and tapping into a source of strength and guidance beyond ourselves. It's quite a framework, wouldn't you say?
It really is, and I think what makes it so powerful is that it's not just a theoretical framework, it's something that people are actually putting into practice in their lives.
Precisely. And the article we're exploring today provides some really compelling examples of how these principles can play out in the real world.
Right. It talks about 2 individuals, Maria and Ethan, who faced very different challenges, but found strength and stability by applying these principles. I'm curious to hear your take on their stories. What struck you as particularly insightful or inspiring?
Well, what I find fascinating is how Maria and Ethan demonstrate that building on a solid foundation isn't about avoiding challenges altogether. It's about having the inner resources to navigate those challenges with resilience and grace.
That's a great point. The article doesn't sugarcoat the fact that life can be tough. It acknowledges that we all face storms, whether it's a financial crisis, a health scare, a relationship breakdown, or just the everyday stresses of modern life. But it suggests that having a strong foundation can help us weather those storms more effectively.
Exactly. And let's look at Maria's story as an example. She was a single mom facing significant financial hardship. She could have easily given in to despair or resentment, but instead she drew strength from her faith, her community, and her commitment to raising her children with strong values.
It's like she had this inner compass that kept her on track, even when the external circumstances were incredibly challenging.
Precisely. And it wasn't just blind faith. She actively sought out support from her church community. She made conscious choices that aligned with her values, and she found ways to cultivate joy and gratitude even in the midst of difficult circumstances.
Her story really highlights the power of choosing your response even when life throws you a curveball.
Absolutely. And then we have Ethan, who had a very different experience. He was a successful executive, seemingly living the dream, but he felt a nagging sense of emptiness, a lack of fulfillment.
It's like he had all the outward markers of success, the high-paying job, the material possessions, but something was missing on a deeper level.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of aligning your actions with your values comes into play. Ethan realized that his pursuit of external success wasn't aligned with his deeper values of service and connection. So he made a conscious decision to shift his priorities. He started volunteering his time, mentoring young people, and focusing on building meaningful relationships.
It's like he was building his life on the sand of external validation and achievement, and he realized he needed to shift to a more solid foundation of purpose and connection.
That's a great analogy. And what's so inspiring about Ethan's story is that it shows that it's never too late to reevaluate your foundation and make changes that align with your true self.
So we have Maria, who found strength and resilience amidst adversity, and Ethan, who found purpose and meaning by realigning his priorities. Their stories show that building a life on solid ground isn't about following a rigid formula. It's about finding what works for you, what resonates with your values, and integrating those principles into your unique life journey.
You've hit the nail on the head. And the article goes on to provide some practical tips for how we can apply these principles to our own lives, regardless of our individual circumstances.
This is where it gets really interesting for our listeners, right? We've talked about the why and the what of building a solid foundation, but now let's dive into the how. What specific actions can we take to create that sense of stability and resilience in our own lives?
Well, the article starts with a principle that seems simple on the surface, but can be surprisingly challenging to put into practice: honesty. It emphasizes the importance of being truthful in all our interactions, not just for the sake of others, but for our own well-being.
You know, I used to think honesty was just about not telling outright lies, but I've come to realize that it goes much deeper than that. It's about being authentic, being transparent, being true to yourself in all your relationships and endeavors.
That's a really insightful observation, and it connects to a psychological concept called reciprocity. When we're honest with others, it creates a sense of trust and safety, which encourages them to be honest with us in return. It builds a foundation of mutual respect and understanding, which strengthens our relationships.
So honesty isn't just about being morally upright. It's actually a practical strategy for building stronger, healthier relationships.
Exactly. And those strong, healthy relationships are a key component of a solid foundation. They provide support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging, which can help us navigate challenging times.
Okay, so honesty is key. What other tips does the article offer?
Another principle it emphasizes is kindness. It suggests that incorporating small acts of kindness into our daily routines can have a profound impact on our own well-being, as well as the well-being of those around us.
It's amazing how such a simple concept can be so transformative. I've noticed that when I make a conscious effort to be kind, even in small ways, it shifts my whole perspective. It's like it creates a ripple effect of positivity.
It's so true. And research has actually shown that acts of kindness release endorphins in the brain, which have mood-boosting and stress-reducing effects. So being kind isn't just good for others, it's good for us, too.
It's like a win-win situation. We get to feel good and we make others feel good in the process. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And speaking of feeling good, the article also highlights the importance of staying connected to that source of strength and guidance beyond ourselves, whether we call it God, a higher power, or simply a sense of purpose that transcends our individual ego.
Right. We touched on this earlier with the idea of prayer, but I think it's worth exploring a bit further, especially for those who might be new to the concept or hesitant to embrace it.
Absolutely. And I want to emphasize that this isn't about adhering to any specific religious dogma or doctrine. It's about finding what resonates with you, what helps you tap into a sense of peace, purpose, and connection that goes beyond the everyday ups and downs of life.
So it's not necessarily about going to church or following a specific set of rules. It's more about cultivating that inner connection, that sense of grounding and alignment with something larger than yourself.
Exactly. And there are many paths to that connection. Some people find it through meditation, mindfulness, spending time in nature, creative expression, or acts of service. The key is to find what works for you and make it a regular practice in your life.
It's like finding your own unique way to tune in to that frequency of peace and purpose, right?
That's a great way to put it. And the article suggests that making this connection a priority can be incredibly helpful when we're facing those inevitable storms of life.
So we've got honesty, kindness, and staying connected to a source of strength beyond ourselves. Any other practical tips for building a life on solid ground?
Well, the article also acknowledges that even with the best intentions, there will be times when we struggle to maintain that solid foundation. We all face challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. And that's where the importance of self-compassion comes in.
That's such an important point. It's so easy to get caught up in self-criticism, especially when we make mistakes or feel like we're not living up to our own expectations.
It's a common human experience. But the article reminds us that we're all works in progress. We're all learning, growing, and evolving. And when we can extend compassion to ourselves, even in those moments when we feel like we've fallen short, it allows us to get back up, learn from our mistakes, and keep moving forward.
It's like that saying, fall 7 times, stand up 8. Building a life on solid ground isn't about being perfect. It's about having the resilience to keep getting back up when you stumble.
Beautifully said. And the article offers some specific strategies for cultivating self-compassion, such as practicing mindfulness, challenging negative self-talk, and focusing on our strengths and accomplishments.
Those are great tips, and I think they speak to a larger point that the article makes. Building a life on solid ground is an ongoing process. It's not a destination we arrive at, it's a journey we're constantly on.
You're absolutely right. And it's a journey that requires ongoing effort, intentionality, and a willingness to learn and grow. But the rewards are immeasurable. A life filled with purpose, meaning, resilience, and joy.
This has been such an insightful conversation, but before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on one more aspect of the article that really resonated with me. The idea that building a life on solid ground isn't just about personal gain, it's also about making a positive impact on the world around us.
That's a fantastic point, and one that often gets overlooked in discussions about personal growth and development. The article suggests that when we build our own lives on a solid foundation, we naturally become beacons of strength and stability for others. We inspire those around us to do the same, and we create a ripple effect of positivity that can transform communities and even the world at large.
It's like that quote from Marianne Williamson. As we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
That's a perfect way to sum it up. Building a life on solid ground is about so much more than just our own individual well-being. It's about contributing to a more compassionate, just, and loving world.
So we've explored the why, the what, and the how of building a life on a solid foundation. We've delved into inspiring stories, practical tips, and the transformative power of connecting to something larger than ourselves. But I have a feeling our deep dive isn't quite over yet.
You're right. There are still some important questions to ponder, and I think our listeners are going to want to hear what we have to say about those in our final part. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, as we've been exploring this idea of building a life on solid ground, one question keeps coming back to me. Is it really possible to create that sense of unshakable stability in a world that often feels so unpredictable and chaotic?
That's a really profound question, and one that I think a lot of people wrestle with. We live in a world that's constantly changing, full of uncertainty and challenges that can sometimes feel overwhelming.
Exactly. It's like, even if we build our lives on the most solid foundation imaginable, there's always the possibility of some unforeseen storm coming along and just shaking things up.
That's true, and I think it's important to acknowledge that we can't control everything that happens to us. Life is full of surprises, both good and bad. But what we can control is how we respond to those surprises, how we choose to navigate those challenges.
So it's less about creating a life that's immune to storms and more about developing the resilience to weather those storms effectively.
You got it. It's about having that inner strength, that unwavering sense of self that allows you to bend without breaking, to adapt and evolve without losing sight of who you are at your core.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm wondering, how do we actually cultivate that kind of resilience? Is it something we're born with, or is it something we can develop over time?
That's a great question, and I think it's a combination of both nature and nurture. Some people may have a natural predisposition towards resilience, but I believe it's a skill that can be learned and strengthened through practice.
So it's like a muscle that we can train and develop over time.
Exactly. And the article we've been discussing actually provides some really helpful guidance on how to do just that.
Oh, I'm all ears. What kind of resilience training does the article recommend?
Well, it all starts with building a strong foundation, which we've already discussed in detail. Connecting with your values, finding your purpose, cultivating healthy relationships, and nurturing your spiritual well-being. These are the core elements that provide a sense of stability and grounding, even when the external world feels chaotic.
Okay, so that's the foundation. But what about the actual training part? What specific practices can we engage in to develop our resilience muscles?
One practice that's often emphasized is mindfulness. It's about cultivating present moment awareness, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judgment.
You know, I've heard a lot about mindfulness lately, but I have to admit I'm still a bit fuzzy on what it actually entails and how it relates to resilience.
That's a common question. Mindfulness is essentially about learning to observe your inner experience without getting swept away by it.
So it's like creating a little bit of space between yourself and your thoughts and emotions so that you're not completely controlled by them.
Exactly. And when we can do that, when we can observe our reactions without judgment, it gives us more choice in how we respond to challenging situations.
That makes sense. So instead of automatically reacting with fear or anger when something stressful happens, we can pause, take a breath, and choose a more skillful response.
Precisely. And that ability to pause, to choose our response rather than simply reacting, is a key component of resilience.
Okay, mindfulness, check. What other practices does the article suggest for building resilience?
Another key practice is cultivating self-compassion. We talked about this briefly in the previous part, but it's worth emphasizing again because it's so important, especially when we're facing setbacks or challenges.
Right. It's so easy to beat ourselves up when we make mistakes or things don't go our way. But the article reminds us that we're all human and we all mess up sometimes.
Absolutely. And self-compassion is about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a good friend who's going through a tough time. It's about acknowledging our imperfections without judgment and recognizing that we're worthy of love and support even when we make mistakes.
That's so powerful. And I think it ties back to the idea of having a strong foundation. When we know that we're fundamentally worthy and lovable, regardless of our accomplishments or failures, it gives us a sense of inner security that allows us to bounce back from setbacks more easily.
You're absolutely right. Self-compassion is a crucial ingredient in building resilience. It allows us to be gentle with ourselves when we're struggling, learn from our mistakes, and keep moving forward with grace and courage.
Okay, so we have mindfulness, self-compassion, any other practices that we should be adding to our resilience toolkit?
The article also emphasizes the importance of seeking support from others. We touched on this earlier with the idea of fellowship, but it's worth reiterating that we don't have to go through life's challenges alone.
Right. We're social creatures, hardwired for connection. And reaching out for support, whether it's from friends, family, a therapist, or a support group, can make a huge difference in our ability to cope with difficult situations.
Absolutely. Sharing our burdens with others, allowing them to offer support and encouragement, can lighten our load and remind us that we're not alone in our struggles.
And sometimes just talking things through with someone who understands can help us gain clarity and perspective, right?
Exactly. And that can be incredibly empowering. When we feel supported and understood, we're more likely to feel capable of facing challenges and finding solutions.
Okay, so we have mindfulness, self-compassion, seeking support. Any other final words of wisdom on the topic of resilience?
Well, the article concludes by reminding us that building a life on solid ground, a life that can withstand any storm, is an ongoing process. It's not something we achieve overnight, and it's not a destination we ever truly arrive at. It's a journey of continuous growth, learning, and adaptation.
That's a great point. It's not about achieving some kind of perfect, unshakable state. It's about embracing the journey, the ups and downs, the challenges and triumphs, and knowing that even when we stumble, we have the tools and resources to get back up and keep moving forward.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Building a life on solid ground is a lifelong endeavor, but it's one that's well worth the effort.
I couldn't agree more. And I hope this deep dive has provided our listeners with some valuable insights and inspiration to start building or strengthening their own foundations. Remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one practice that resonates with you, whether it's mindfulness, self-compassion, or connecting with a supportive community, and start incorporating it into your life. Even small steps can make a big difference over time. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, keep building, keep growing, and keep seeking that solid ground.